So the next session is going to be on the dark side of fintech. We have 5 speakers here, and Andrei actually is teaching dark fintech class at U of Cambridge, and we have 3 speakers who have written articles and books on this topic. Now Tom is going to moderate the session. It should be very interesting.
Thanks, President Harker and Jalapa, for putting together this terrific program. I noticed yesterday there was a lot of hype, and today there's more discussion of confidence, trust, and safety and soundness. So I come from the safety and soundness side of the ledger myself. Let me introduce the panel. We've got a terrific panel today, and Stacey is here virtually. But let me introduce the panel, then I'm going to take 5 minutes to give an overview of what we call the dark side of technology. So welcome to the dark side of the presentation. We are the Darth Vaders of this program, to pick up on the Star Wars analogy that was used this morning. First, to my right, I'll go across here. Andrei Kirilenko is a professor of finance at the Cambridge Judge Business School at the University of Cambridge. Prior to that, he was director of the Center for Global Finance and Technology at the Imperial College Business School and coordinator of the MIT Center for Finance and Policy. Prior to that, Andrei was chief economist at the CFTC. Next is, let me do Stacey next, because she seems to be in the middle of the picture there. Stacey is Deputy Director of Research and Analysis at the U.S. Treasury's Office of Financial Research, which supports U.S. financial stability analysis for FSOC. She is currently on assignment to the Fed. She has held several senior leadership roles in asset management and registered investment advisory firms, and has been an officer and economist at the Federal Reserve Banks of Kansas City and Richmond. Linda Jeng was, until very recently, Chief Policy and Regulatory Officer at Center Consortium. She's a visiting scholar and adjunct professor of law at Georgetown University Law Center's Institute for International Economic Law, and a senior lecturing fellow at Duke Law School. And she's held positions at the Fed, the SEC, the OCC, and Credit Agricole. And last, no, not last yet, Ben Colman, getting to the last. Ben is founder of Reality Defender, a provider of deepfake detection, and Ben's going to put on a little show at the end of this presentation. Previously, he led cybersecurity commercialization at Goldman Sachs and worked at Google. And last but not least is Todd Conklin. Todd currently leads the cyber portfolio for the U.S. Department of the Treasury under Deputy Secretary, and is the Treasury's Chief Information Officer for Intelligent Platforms and Innovation. Todd has held a number of critical positions at Treasury over the last 2 decades. So with that, let me try to set the stage on what I think is sort of the real side of technology. In 1977, I worked on, at the Comptroller's Office, and Richard, you may remember this, the approval for national banks to establish automated teller machines, ATMs. And we thought that was the height of technological development, when national banks could begin to establish little remote kiosks called ATMs. And I was in the carpool with the lawyer who authored that letter approving ATMs. And so back and forth to work every day, we would debate the issues and spend hours talking about the critical issues in terms of what was going on here. And we focused most on whether or not an ATM was a branch, if you can believe it. Because if it was a branch, it was going to require a branch hearing and all the frivolity that goes along with that. And I can tell you, we didn't spend 3 seconds talking about the security aspects of ATMs, the insecurity, the data mining that might go on, the use of that data, or what has resulted today in enormous amounts of fraud related to ATMs around the nation. We just didn't spend 3 seconds thinking about that. And that sort of, I think, earmarks what's happened over the last 30 years in terms of technology. We focused on euphoria, we focused on innovation, and we have left security behind. It's really been the subordinate issue in terms of everything that's gone on, and now we are paying the price. Every click you make, every place you go is being recorded. That data is being mined, it is being analyzed, sliced, and diced, and marketed. It's being marketed to people who want to sell you products, it's being marketed to people who want to control you, and it's being marketed to governments that want to take you over. That is where we are. Should we be here? I don't think so. We could have had a different future if we knew where we were going. If you talk to the pioneers who established the internet, what they will tell you today is it's not that they didn't consider security, it is that they didn't know where the internet was going. They didn't know that the internet would be used to store every inch of data on the planet or every ounce of value that's created. They thought the internet was being created to share information among a group of universities and people. It's become the place where we store everything and we do all our business, but it's not secure enough to do all that. So what we're going to do today is talk about 4 different aspects of the dark side of technology. First is the risk created by the continuous and ubiquitous collection of data. Now, in that regard, I just read a book. I would highly recommend it. I read a book by Mark Goodman called Future Crimes. Mark was an LA police officer. He then went into the FBI, handled cybersecurity, and he talks about the kinds of crimes that are occurring online. And it is just mind-numbingly frightening. If you can get through that book and able to sleep at night, you're lucky. I mean, for example, he talks about an application that Google and Apple were selling in 2012. They don't sell it anymore. In 2012, they were selling an application developed by 2 guys in a Moscow firm. And the application was called Girls Around Me. And the user could download that application, and by the use of information that was being collected from social media, websites, GPS locations, mobile technology, and everything else that we do when we click, you would be able to see women within a 3-mile radius of where you were, where they were, what their pictures looked like, and what their profiles were. Now, if that doesn't make the hair on the back of your head stand up, nothing will. Number 2, can we believe anything we see or hear online anymore? Now, Ben's going to talk to us about deepfakes. And the science of deepfakes with the generative adversarial networks that are being developed to create deepfakes with the help of enormous amounts of artificial intelligence and deep learning and machine learning is just stunning. And you'll see a little bit of that from Ben. Thirdly, the impact of the collection of all this data on everything from marketing to geopolitical consequences. Another book I read, which I highly recommend, is We Have Been Harmonized. It's about a Chinese nationalist entrepreneur who now lives outside of China, talking about what's going on inside of China. And it is, again, frightening. There are 300 million facial recognition cameras deployed in China. Every citizen has to carry an application on their phone that records everything they do, and they get a social score. And if your score is not high enough, one of several things can happen as a citizen. You can lose your right to mass transportation. You can lose your right to send your children to certain schools. And ultimately, if your score is low enough, you have to go to a re-education camp. Now, there are many who I've read recently, because I'm writing another book called The Unhackable Internet, which comes out in February. Several I've read suggest that what's going on here in terms of data is a war for the future of who sets the rules on the planet. Will the rules be democratic rules set by countries like the United States, or the rules be those set by countries like China? And lastly, we want to talk a little bit about the insecurity of the internet generally. I mentioned that a little bit, but you can't but watch the news and see what's going on in terms of solar winds, Colonial Pipeline, JBS, Lodge4j, and the massive amount of attacks on financial institutions, on a pantheon of financial institutions from JP Morgan, Citibank, CNA, Capital One, Equifax. It goes on and on and on. Ransomware, all kinds of attacks, all kinds of incursions, basically because of deficiencies in the humans that handle the machines and the coding that is in the machines. And I talk a little bit about in my new book about the original sin of coding. And where has that put us? Where it's put us is that the markets are all the more willing to reward innovation. So first to market is important, but they don't really punish insecurity. So what does that mean from an economic point of view? It means you don't test the coding, you don't test the software as much as you should. You get it out, you launch first, you patch second. And that has created a patchwork and a sort of environment that leads from one vulnerability to another. And so with that, I want to start questioning the panel on several of these issues, and I'm going to start with Andrei. And I want to ask you about some of this stuff in terms of the fact that there's always been fraudulent and manipulative activity going on. But the scale now has seemed to change in the digital domain. So what are our priorities? What has changed? What should we be doing?
Right. Thanks very much for having me here. Thank you. Thank you, the organizers, and thanks for the opening remarks. So let's, we put the words fintech in there, dark fintech or light fintech. So the way I think about fintech is basically provision of financial and products of services using digital technologies, right? So what does that really mean? It means hardware and software. That's what it means. Mostly software. Some more concentrated hardware, as you've heard about, provision of cloud services. And dark fintech is the same, is hardware and software, only it is being used to defraud, manipulate, and abuse both providers and customers in the financial services space, since we're focusing on fintech. There are other broader issues. What we probably all have noticed is that the major thing that changed that place, and there's always been sort of fraud on that domain, the major things that changed that is the COVID pandemic. As a result of that, all of us pretty much had to go online into unprotected environments. And you can see that fraud, for example, went up in some jurisdictions 600%. What that means is that all of a sudden, money is flowing towards fraudsters who are now scaling up. Imagine that now you have 6 times as much money to work with. You can build your algorithms, you can test your algorithms. Even each one of you have probably received a text, and even I could tell you, to ask you to do something, to click on something. Even if you did nothing and deleted that text, the algorithm has learned about you. So even if you did absolutely nothing, it put you in a particular bucket, and it will go after you in some other way. So the scale of it, because of the unprotected environments, has changed massively. And from what I've seen and talked to people, there is now an industry with a lot of money, with a lot of talent flowing into it, and with algorithms that have been battle tested to really do a lot of harm.
In terms of that scale, I'm not sure if this is on. It is. In terms of that scale, I sort of came in touch with that over the years that I was representing financial institutions. It used to be that all you could steal from a bank was the amount you could throw in the back of a van. Now you can steal everything the bank's got digitally. So, Linda, I want to throw it to you. And what do you see as being some of the nefarious uses of data that we have to be careful about?
Is this on? Can you hear me now? Okay. So I recently joined the Council for Crypto Innovation just last week. And we have a WeWork office in DC. I went to get my card. And when I registered at the desk, they took a picture of me, or so I thought. It turned out they were using a software to scam my face. And it's powered by a company called Jumio. Never heard of it, so afterwards I went and looked it up. Jumio, for those of you who use WeWork, and I'm sure many other KYC companies use them as well. They use facial biometrics to KYC you. And I thought I knew a lot of these companies because I have put a book out on open banking, but there are now other kinds of companies involved in KYC beyond just the data aggregators like Plaid, Finicity, and Yoli InvestNet. And I'm not really against having my face scanned, but I would have liked to have been better informed. I would also like to know what they're going to do with my biometric data, because I only have one face, unless I want to get plastic surgery after. And so I want to know how it's going to be stored, who are they going to share it with, and will they be selling it? Can I get a share of that profit? And ultimately, this brings up the question of, is our data really ours to control? And I think that's what's really missing in our country, is that there is no framework for consumer data rights. The head of CFPB, Rohit Chopra, talked about 1033, and yes, we have the right to customer data access under Dodd-Frank, but we don't have the right to share our data. We don't have the right to take our data with us. We don't have a right to ask them to stop, and we don't have the right to ask them to correct or delete. And this is an area where I think the CFPB really should focus their work on. Congress should pass legal rights to give us the power to own and control our data. And so later in this panel, I would like to bring, we're talking about dark side of fintech. I want to bring an example of a lightsaber. I think a digital identity that allows us to control our digital assets could be a way forward. And people call it decentralized identity in the engineering space, but I really like to call it a self-custody identity. And so I'll stop there, wait for that presentation.
Yeah, on the issue of whether you own your own data, there's a great case I recall out of California in the early 1990s that said that a gentleman named Mr. Moore didn't own his own spleen once it was removed from him and used to create a brand new drug which he wanted a piece of. And he lost that case, that he didn't own his own spleen once it was taken out and that development took place. So we have a lot of work to do in terms of who owns your data. Then you worked at Goldman Sachs, you handled cybersecurity. What you lose sleep over at night?
My main focus is thinking about the challenges around identity theft and identity impersonations. Identity theft has been around since biblical times. I think you'll remember an example in the Garden of Eden with the snake pretending to be somebody else. The challenge today is that it can be done at such large scale by anybody with an old iPhone, anybody with an internet connection, with absolutely no experience with creating a virus or hacking an account. They point, click, they grab your great picture on LinkedIn, and be off to the races. And the real challenge is on the consumer side is a dramatic lack of education. I can't educate my parents to protect their identity, let alone use two-factor security. On the other hand, it's a lack of regulations and standards. And I think we're moving in the right direction, just maybe not at the right speed. Bad actors have a lot more money and creativity, but other parts of the world are moving quicker. And just a quick shout out to Singapore, which outlawed synthetic media used for identity theft. And the European Commission, which starting in January, will put very onerous fines, making GDPR look like nothing on the big platforms like Google and Amazon and Facebook if they don't get their act together. So I think the next year, 2023, will be the year of better protections and tools and regulations for identity, but it all starts here in this room.
So we talked in the last panel about financial literacy, and you're raising a new aspect, and that is technological literacy that is probably as low as financial literacy. Stacey, I want to ask you about systemic stability and what you do in terms of thinking about the vulnerabilities that are being created systemically by technology, and particularly the dark side of technology.
Thanks, Tom, and good morning, everybody. So when I think about the dark side and the financial stability risks, I think of the dark side, very broadly, and I think it's not coming from the fin part, it comes from the tech part. I go back to some of the themes that Tom started with, that it's really the digitization, the digital communications and information systems technology that allows us to have blockchain and cryptocurrencies and stablecoins, and the ability to send messages to people from your little device in your pocket, that are really creating a lot of fragility here. I like to think of the analogy to constructing buildings in an earthquake zone where you're building on a network of fault lines. Well, our economy, our financial system, every aspect of our lives these days is constructed on a network of basically essentially underground digital fault lines that are opaque and complex and ever changing. Every time somebody connects to you, you connect to somebody else. All of the systems that are there, all the technologies that work to scan and store Linda's face, for example, those are all underpinning everything that we do. And it's a system with lots of long digital, largely invisible supply chains that's very fragile and brings a fragility and a systemic risk to the system that we often forget to talk about. I mean, if that system isn't working at some point or parts of it are broken, doesn't have to be from a cyber attack. It could just be from that something breaks, although it could be from a cyber attack. Nobody owns those networks. Nobody's really insuring for the fundamental soundness. And as Tom mentioned, the system wasn't really designed with the infrastructure, the standards, the protocols, the security wasn't really designed with the idea that it was going to be supporting all this weight. And that network connects to lots of other networks like the electric grid. And so they all have to work. And I think we need a broader view of resilience to think, and when we're thinking about financial stability there.
So, Todd, you're busy keeping us safe at night over at the Treasury. What's the Treasury focused on? What are you guys worried about?
Yeah, I'll start from a lens of anti-money laundering and sanctions compliance in this space. And oftentimes we start, and our mind immediately jumps to that Silk Road example, darknet market example of really purely criminal actors leveraging technology platforms, and also kind of with an overarching libertarian, anti-government, anti-regulation kind of technology stack and mindset attached to it. Frankly, that doesn't concern me that much because we have a lot of tools across Treasury and the Department of Justice to influence and impact and take down those issues pretty quickly as they become apparent and observed. What's more concerning and more difficult to address is really the more prevalent part of the ecosystem, where we have really talented technologists with very limited financial background or financial regulatory background especially, that then try to apply technology innovation to disrupt the financial space. And really that's the heart of the issues over the last 5 to 10 years that we've observed, and that's much more difficult for Treasury to impact, because what happens is a lot of these really talented technologists with good intentions in terms of trying to make technology work within the legacy financial infrastructure and try to disrupt that in a way that makes the sector more accessible to more people, right? I think some of them really do have that good mindset, not that criminal mindset of the darknet markets, really good intentions, and also they want to make a lot of money quickly. They rely on this startup culture and this equity funding round, which compliance doesn't sell well in those rounds, right? So their goal is to design launch, and scale as quickly as possible. And unfortunately, what often happens is they layer on compliance either at the tail end of that or even after they've launched, which becomes extremely problematic. And so there's a significant, sometimes multi-year gap in compliance for some of these newer innovative fintechs, when frankly, if they built it into the design of the actual tech stack or product, it could potentially even be a market advantage for them, right? But they just don't think about it. So it's not necessarily the criminal actor, it's just the talented technologist who wants to do good things and disrupt the space, who just doesn't think compliance first, and it has to be part of that initial thinking.
So Stacey, I want to turn back to you and Todd and talk about financial crisis, systemic stability. In my book, I convinced myself, and I said that in the next 10 years, there was at least a 50% chance that a technology event would trigger a financial crisis. Do you think about that? How might one play out? What are you doing in terms of worrying about cyber events causing a financial crisis?
I think about that all the time. That's my day-to-day work these days. And you're right, we haven't had a financial crisis driven by a cyber event, but we've been really lucky with that. I have a paper that came out in May with Antonis Katidis, where we studied an actual cyber event that was not systemic, but involved a lot of adaptation by banks and intervention by the official sector that helped mitigate the effects of that. And I think we were able to quantify the effects. And so this was an event that started at a technology service provider. It had a cyber event. Doesn't really matter if it was an attack or an accident, but as soon as the problem was discovered, the technology service provider went offline. And when it did so, some banks that relied on the service provider for their usual and preferred and automated way of sending payments over Fedwire were unable to use that approach and had to switch, once they figured out they needed to more manual means of sending Fedwire payments. Despite that, switching to those means and having the Fed extend the Fedwire trading day during this event, there was still a 51% drop in the dollar value of payments sent on the first day, attributable just to that cyber event, that outage at the technology service firm, and about a 20% drop in value on subsequent days. And so that's the first round effect of this, which sometimes when we think about financial crises, we talk about popcorn versus dominoes. And so that was a popcorn. A bunch of banks had the same shock. Their service provider went down. But there was also dominoes, because those banks were able to send fewer payments. Other banks that might have had no dealings with this technology service provider had fewer funds available than they otherwise would have to send their own payments. And so they had to adapt. They either drew down liquidity buffers, which is what buffers are for, or they borrowed in the Fed's funds market, or were more likely to go to the discount window, and the Fed accommodated that discount window borrowing. So that's in varying degrees, a liquidity event for some of these innocent bystander entities. And so you've got contagion, or the domino effect, going from the first round to the second round. And so you have all this intervention and adaptation that mitigated the first and the second round events. And yet we still saw an impact. The event, no one would think of it as having been systemic, but again, you have to remember all the adaptation that went on, and that while a lot of banks were affected, not that many were affected in the greater scheme of things. And while there were large banks affected, they weren't all that large. And so it could have been a lot worse.
Todd?
I'll start with the Colonial Pipeline example, because it really changed my thinking in this space and how Treasury adjusted its incident response protocol. So if folks remember, about around last May, June, Colonial Pipeline was hit with effectively a low level, what we'd refer to almost as a level 1 cyber incident out of five severity levels. So not particularly significant. And we went into that weekend with the mindset of, there's going to be no supply chain disruption here. And it'll be pretty quick for us to kind of help and get this resolved and get them online within a couple of days, most likely, and no big issue, right? So we dodged a bullet, was kind of the mindset. Well, what happened, human behavior stepped in. And before you know it, by Saturday, there were lines around the block up and down the East Coast, because there was a gas shortage, right? So what our slow response from a communications perspective around a low-level cyber incident caused the supply chain crunch in that situation. So I don't want that to happen in a financial sector scenario. So what we've done is we've adjusted all of our incident response playbooks to add a very significant communications and public relations element to them, which includes the entire financial regulator community, includes the White House, includes the Department of Justice apparatus, and then also, and this is critical, includes the financial sector and all the critical trade groups. So, and we're going to exercise our new playbook, again, specifically focused on comms, in a month, in a joint session. And basically what we want to have is an escalation matrix for that low-level cyber incident to not spiral into a supply chain issue. And that's a more likely scenario, frankly, than the more catastrophic, level 5 type incident targeting the financial sector, which the financial sector, thankfully, is more elevated in their preparation than most other sectors. Not saying not vulnerable, just saying that we are more prepared than most other sectors, in large part because of the public-private partnership, which has been in place for 20 years. We have multiple joint apparatus and infrastructures that are shared across the public-private partnership in the financial sector space, and we've built out multiple incident response plans over the years, which we've tested on a quarterly basis, and they work. And there's also, through Treasury's leadership of the Financial Banking Information Infrastructure Committee, Treasury has the ability to, within minutes, convene a senior leader session of all the financial regulator leadership, chaired by Secretary of Treasury and Deputy Secretary of Treasury, in the event that there is a systemic cyber attack, where we could respond with liquidity, bank holiday options, a whole range of emergency response options that we've prepared in advance to apply to a cyber scenario.
So last year, a major financial institution was hacked, and they announced that it had been done by a very sophisticated group, likely a nation state or someone subsidized by a nation state. And several months later, it was determined that it was actually the work of a 21-year-old kid who lived 3 blocks away from me in McLean, Virginia, who is now living in Turkey. And so you see what's happened here is we're not only dealing with nation states that are funding all kinds of hackers around the world, we're dealing with people who have several layers of sophistication living in, several blocks away from all of us. And as these social engineering attacks continue to grow and in style and type, Andrei, what is it that we can do to deal with this kind of stuff? What is it that the government can do?
Yes, thank you. Another one that I'd like to add to the one you just mentioned, and the one that really rattled me, I don't know if it rattled others, is the July 2020 Twitter attack. It was a social engineering attack, again, by 3 individuals out of Florida. Twitter went to VPN because of COVID, and VPN was glitching. And so these individuals impersonated themselves as IT support. They gained access to Twitter admin accounts, actually going through multiple accounts, not right away, over a period of time, and gained control over a number of accounts. They engaged in they tried to monetize it, but what rattled me, and the reason I know about it is because New York State DFS has conducted an investigation and issued a public report, which I think is very, very important to do so the public knows and is prepared, is that Joe Biden's account was taken over. And imagine that instead of engaging in double or nothing Bitcoin scam or a double Bitcoin scam, they just tweeted from official Joe Biden's account, George Floyd is an idiot. Right? Election goes completely different way. Go explain then to the public that it's not you, somebody's taken over your account. That's how systemic it is, right? If this is not systemic risk to you, what is, right? So that's an example of humans being a weak link in that. And importantly, in social engineering attacks, again, Twitter is not a pipeline. Twitter is a digital platform. I mean, they're digitally native. They didn't have from the investigation that was conducted, they didn't have someone in charge of cybersecurity. So again, going to the point that not only that startups are going that way. It's an established, publicly traded company that actually didn't have someone in charge of cybersecurity. The reason they were delayed is that no one actually knew who to talk to. Like, what do we do? Like, who is in charge here? And that was a very, very close brush. So the combination of, interacting with the humans, manipulating humans into giving you access, what it does in the computer parlance, there are two attack vectors. One is an external attack vector, and the other is an internal attack vector. So internal attack vector, think of Edward Snowden. Someone with rights who could come in and do a bunch of damage. Social engineering flips that. It goes from external to internal, and you don't know who that is. You don't know, right? And even it could be someone on your rapid response cybersecurity team. You don't know who that is anymore. And that is very, very dangerous. That's proliferating. The amount of social engineering, the number of reported social engineering attacks is increasing, and they could be massively painful. I mean, really, really, really painful, because they could really spread like wildfire, because you don't know, right? It seems like someone you can trust, but you can't.
It seems amazing to me and illogical that we're moving our entire lives from the analog world, where we have rules, borders, police, and governance, right, and fences and locks on our doors, to a cyber world where we're anonymous and have none of that. And it seems to me at some point we ought to be thinking about, well, wait a minute, how is this anonymity going to work against me? And Ben, I know you've been working with corporations on that question and the issue of how to deal with deep fakes. Give us some insights into that, because it seems to me like a deep, dark hole with no solutions unless we try to figure out how to create a better internet.
Yeah, I think there's the parlance of whether it's a carrot or a stick approach to industry. And for the most part, right now, it's purely been a carrot. In the U.S., there's been no major requirements from policy perspective or new regulations in this space, which has allowed companies like Facebook to say, you know what, we're going to ask our users to click the button at the bottom and flag something if they see something. And then if they flag something, which they often don't, but if they do, it goes to a team of content moderators who all day just look at the most inappropriate videos and images and audio. And humans aren't qualified to do that. Just in the last 6 months, deepfakes, synthetic media can absolutely get past the best human moderator. I'll show some deepfake videos when I present, but human content moderators will find those deepfakes more real than a picture of Stacey on this WebEx right now. And so the world is getting a lot closer together and a lot easier to do inappropriate things, with a lot less education in how they do them. And I think that only when companies are required to engage, much like I mentioned in Asia and the European Commission, we need that same leadership in the United States, so that companies and consumers understand they have to behave in a certain way, without which there's pretty dramatic repercussions.
So at the same time, there's an enormous effort, largely represented by Web3 and other things, but to decentralize databases, to take back that power from big tech companies, because everybody is a little concerned about 3 or 4 companies having all the data in the world and what they do with it. And in fact, those 3 or 4 companies now own most of the cable pipelines that go under the sea. So, Linda, I know that you've thought about a decentralized identity and what that means in terms of this issue. Can you talk to us a little bit about that and explain whether or not that is some sort of solution, salve, or something in between?
Oh, I want to first ask, would you like me to do the presentation now? Would that be actually easier as a response?
I think the tech people want to wait till the end.
To the end? Okay. Well, then, without being able to show you more concretely, there are solutions now available through Web3 technologies to address this problem of data ownership. Stacey had discussed issues of hacks. What if there are outages? What would happen? Well, blockchain technologies is actually a resilient solution. If one part of the blockchain is attacked, other parts of the blockchain can stand up to the other parts of the blockchain can actually still contain the data, and activities can still continue, even if one particular part of the chain is attacked. And so I think we need to start looking at how can DLT actually make the financial system more resilient. And then also the idea of having data stored in a distributed way can also prevent systemic risk. And some of the issues, we all know now that data is power and data is money. So how can we treat data with the respect that it deserves? And again, back to what I was saying earlier, you really need to begin with the consumer because each one of us is a data product. And if we're going to become essentially, parts of a new digital economy, and the Fed is going to have to think about this too, what is it going to mean to be a central bank running monetary policy for a digital economy? Then you need to think through the units of that economy is going to actually be the individual. If that's the case, then the individual should and must be able to control the data that the individual generates. And so then the question becomes, where do you store this data? We had someone from Google speak yesterday, and afterwards, he was explaining to me that there's around 100 data centers just in the U.S. alone. And if one center is down, then I asked, well, what will happen? Like, will the other, data centers, take its place? And he said, only if the company chooses to store in 2 data centers or more. But if they only chose to store their data in 1 data center, and that data center went down, then it's on the company. So let's take a lesson from that. Distributed data storage is going to be vitally important. And I think blockchain technology can be helpful. It doesn't have to be the only choice, but it is certainly a very useful approach.
Okay, so I want to give each of you 2 minutes to wrap up, and I'm going to go to Ben and Linda last, so the slides can be shown. Stacey, I'm going to start with you. Based on what Ben said, I'm not sure you are Stacey, but if you want to start by proving you are Stacey, that's fine. But 2 minutes to wrap up here in terms of the things that you see as vulnerability and where we should be going.
Well, given the conversation, I've lost the ability to understand how I can prove that I'm Stacey. But let's hope I can someday. Given the big issues that I've raised, I think your book, Tom, that's going to be coming out on the unhackable internet is certainly a place to start in thinking about how to build more resilient systems. But going to the cyber event that I talked about and the point Linda just raised about how, you can have your data, in Google's cloud, but unless you're paying to be at multiple data centers, you don't necessarily, have that ability, that protection if one part gets down. There's a real need for every aspect of our financial systems operations to be thinking hard about all of the digital connections, all the steps, and what happens if any one of them goes down. And there's usually parts that we don't even realize are connected to other parts. And not just the financial system, but other suppliers of suppliers. So I think contingency planning, and not just having the plan, but taking systems down and executing it and switching to it. The banks in the example I gave, had contingency plans. They just didn't have the fire drill down fast enough. If they'd switched to their contingency plan smoothly, there wouldn't have been any effect that would have been noticeable or in any spillovers.
Professor Kirilenko.
People only call me professor when they want a higher grade. So usually they call me Andrei. So I think one of the things that could really help, and there is demand for it. We've been through the pandemic. We learned to sanitize our hands, wear masks, and that sort of thing, right? So cyber hygiene is important, very important. More awareness. One of the sections of the class that I developed for executives is cyber hygiene. Cyber hygiene for yourself, cyber hygiene for your organization, cyber hygiene for your providers, cyber hygienes when you interact with your data. So these are, it's not that complicated, but it changes the point of view, if you will. You start thinking about it like your apt conversations about the ATM. You start thinking about what can go wrong. Can it be hacked? Can it do harm? Who knows something, right? I mean, it's not particularly paranoid, but, look, washing your hands and putting on a mask, if it could save lives, why not? If it could save money, if it could save people from going through tremendous, issues, sort of getting their identities back, it really should be there. I should tell you that ship, however, has sailed. I mean, I am aware from sort of monitoring through some of the white hackers what the prices are in the darknet for your identities on everything you own. The prices because of COVID came down about 10 times. So everything about you is already out there. We had a white hacker basically to reconstruct the entire profile of a cybersecurity expert in our class in 10 minutes flat. Right? It's very, very easy, right? It's already out there. But start protecting yourself now, irrespective, knowing that you are going to be hit in one way or another. Just become a more difficult target. Make your organization a more difficult target. Because remember, customer acquisition for the dark side is the same. It costs them money. The more money it costs them, the less they're going to be going after easy targets. So cyber hygiene is, I think, is a good place to start. Yourself, your organization, broader aspects.
Todd?
I'll go down the crypto rabbit hole for my final remarks. But basically, Deputy Secretary Adeyemo laid this out last September, which was our targeting strategy around the crypto ecosystem, and it focused on three areas: non-compliant exchanges, darknet markets, and mixers. And the problem as we see it from the Treasury perspective is those three elements can't coexist with a healthy, broader crypto ecosystem. It just is not going to work. And I have yet to hear one legitimate use for mixers beyond anonymization of transactions for individuals who have privacy concerns. So it just can't work. If we really want to scale this into a legitimate future, we have to address the mixers, we have to address non-compliant exchanges, and we have to it has to be done from the perspective of the crypto partners and the largest international exchanges. And when we look at one of the more recent sanctions and criminal takedowns of a darknet market, it was the Hydra market, which was in operations for a couple of months post Russian invasion of Ukraine, and it was being leveraged to move about 7 to 10% of all crypto outflows from Russia. Multiple international exchanges were serving as counterparties of both sides of the Hydra market, including some domestic exchanges. No excuse for that. There's no one in this room, no one in this business who doesn't understand that the Hydra market is predominantly criminal exchange market. So you have quote unquote good players still transacting until they're told to stop by the U.S. government. It's just not going to work. It has to be ground up. It has to be from the crypto ecosystem. They have to start to police themselves in much better ways. And we just haven't observed that taking place yet. And then also addressing the systemic problems of mixers. It can't coexist within a legitimate ecosystem.
All right, we've reached the entertainment portion of our session, and Ben.
So we thought we'd start with some fun. The team at the Fed was kind enough to approve a few examples of deepfakes. These are completely synthetic people that do not exist. created using generative adversarial networks. And I'll play a few quickly.
My name is Ben Colman.
I am Ben Colman.
Actually, I am Ben Colman.
I am the real Ben Colman. No, I am the real Ben Colman.
I want to be Ben Colman too.
So these were all made on my iPhone in a few minutes sitting outside in the lobby. And really the challenge around deepfakes was that anybody, a 12-year-old, our grandparents, they could either make a really entertaining deepfake, maybe putting my face on Sean Connery's body in 007, or something much more inappropriate. As we've seen recently with senior women at a particular bank, it's photos taken from LinkedIn and put in very inappropriate videos and images. And why is this happening? It's happening because the AI arms race is accelerating and imbalanced. Compute is getting very cheap. Tooling can be downloaded from any website. Every day there's about 10% more applications to create deepfakes. And while there's over 100,000 models related to deepfakes and synthetic identities, less than 3% are actually used to detect deepfakes. So how do you create a deepfake without being an expert in stats or AI? You go to a website called thispersondoesnotexist.com, which uses a neural network called StyleGAN2. Each time we reload it, it creates a completely new person that will not match against any whitelist or blacklist. You can also use one of 100,000 different applications on your iOS App Store or your Android, create a face, and that's not even thinking about how we could take your face and come out of my face or my nose and add hair. There's a whole world of applications there as well. So what are these used for? They're used to create fake accounts on Facebook, on Google, on Amazon. They're used to create fake accounts on banking applications. Banking applications typically look for identity fraud, identity manipulation. But if it's a new picture, new name, it passes through a lot of times with an onboarding and KYC process because it does not go against any particular blacklist. Deepfake voice fraud. On one hand, I could take your voice with under a minute of recorded words, run it through my iPhone, not even on a new computer, and create a real impersonation of your voice that will again pass a lot of liveness checks. Or I could create a complete synthetic voice from scratch, using again one of the range of the first 50 pages of Google if you just search for synthetic voice modulator. And so where is this being used, particularly in the financial services industry? We are frequently called for my company right before an earnings announcement or economic statistics announcement. Is this audio real? Is this document real? Is this video real? We're seeing it on YouTube. We're seeing it on social media. We're also seeing it on professional networking platforms. This person, this picture, Sarah Smith, is not real, does not work at JP Morgan, does not exist. So just one very quick shameless plug for my company. We take a consortia approach to deepfake detection at Reality Defender. We work with over 100 academic research institutions, Harvard, Stanford, University of Buffalo, University of Munich, Microsoft, who've all contributed their detection models into our ensemble of models. And our ensemble of models allows, within milliseconds, a red light, yellow light, or green light approach, and a logarithmically distributed risk score on any image, driver's license picture, liveness video, document, or real-time audio for a phone call to give a company and organization confidence that who they're talking to is either real or potentially is fake or manipulated. What we're not doing, and what we do not think anyone should do, is try and match somebody versus the real person. We don't want to know who you are. We don't want a face print of Jalapa. We don't want any risk of the challenges of a Cambridge Analytica. And so all we're doing is looking at the actual asset itself and telling the client and their client whether or not it is fake or manipulated without any risk of us leaking any identity information because we don't need it and we don't want it. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. Linda?
Thank you. I think I have a 2-minute flag here, so I'll try to go through this quickly. I made this slide deck when I was still with the Center Consortium a few weeks ago. We had released a new technical standard for decentralized identity called Verity, with the support of many of the most important companies in the crypto space. So the main problem, as you all know, is that it's currently very difficult, if not impossible, to authenticate a customer remotely on the internet. So people in the DeFi space, that's one very obvious example, would be difficult to verify. And even today, when I get a bank account, I still have to go into a bank branch and show that I'm not a deepfake. And so what happens is banks have to collect information about you. WeWork has to collect information about you. Eventually, all your PII is stored with every institution or organization you interact with. And this data proliferation creates honeypots throughout the economy. And as you all know, there have been significant data breaches, and I've been personally a victim of 3 of these. And I still remember the day I went to work for the SEC and they fingerprinted me, and I wondered, how is OPM going to protect my information? Obviously, it could not. And so what we think is there's currently a lot of work being done in the digital identity space. You heard Jill Kunter yesterday at Espresso Systems, and Espresso is actually one of the launch partners of Verity. The idea is that we should have the right to control our digital assets. And that means, I can go to Citibank, I've been a customer with them since law school, and ask them for a verifiable credential. I'm a KYC customer, please issue me a KYC credential. I then collect that credential from Citibank, and then when I decide, all right, I would like to open up a bank account at Bank of America, I can go to Bank of America, show them that I have been issued a KYC credential from Citibank, and then Bank of America can issue me an account. Similarly, I could go to DeFi, and I can go to Aave protocol and present my Citibank KYC credential, and Aave would then give me an account, perhaps give me lower fees, put me in a permission liquidity pool, any number of services. So in the end, I get to collect, I can choose who I want to collect my credentials from, including my driver's license. Currently, the Department of Transportation is working with states around our country to issue what are called MDLs, mobile driver's licenses. I can collect that in my digital wallet. My credit card, JP Morgan Chase is the issuing bank. I can go to them and say, I've been your customer for years, and please issue me a KYC credential. WeWork now has my biometrics, so I would like to have control over that piece of data about myself. And where I work at Georgetown and my community bank. So this is just an example of giving the consumer the power to control their digital assets and ultimately their identity. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them later. Thank you. I hope that was within the 2 minutes.
Thank you. So that was terrific. I want to thank the panelists for a terrific presentation here, and sort of diverting from some of the more bullish things we heard yesterday. And I also want to thank the audience for holding its applause to this moment.